Actor Bob Crane was murdered in 1978 in his home in Scottsdale, Arizona. He left behind a legacy of a hit TV show that, in recent years, would change due to his personal life coming into clearer view. Wild sex parties, voyeurism, and more were the actor's nightly escapades, and that may have been what got him killed. His murder is yet unsolved. That seems like something worth talking about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scary Stories We Tell. I am your host, Chris Stashew, and I am joined by my good friend all the way from a destination that's quite dark. He says goodnight to Mr. Walters once a week, at least I've been told, and he tells some astounding tales that come from the public domain. Your friend and mine, a man I've never seen, Father Malone.
That's all my shows. I can't even reel in here with some sort of snappy thing because I'm just overwhelmed with the sheer number of plugs you crammed into my introduction.
You're welcome. Speaking of cramming things into places, on this episode of Scary Stories We Tell, we're going to be talking a little bit about a film, but more importantly, the case and the man associated with it. We're going to be talking a little bit about the life and death of Mr. Bob Crane, otherwise known as the Hogan of Hogan's Heroes, for those of us that aren't, I guess, old enough to remember the show or even who
Ancient.
Bob Crane is.
I think it's the word you're looking for.
I don't want to say ancient because, it's not. It's more contemporary than I Love Lucy, which I know all about.
Hogan's Heroes was old when I was a kid watching it.
Right. Now it's like you said, ancient.
Yeah.
Of the scrolls of old.
Right.
Yeah. But we're going to be talking about the life and times and death of Mr. Bob Crane, and we're going to be using the film that came out in 2002 as a place to start. That film is Autofocus, which you can find, no plug here because we're not supported by them, over on Amazon Prime or wherever you find the lovely media that you consume. Or if you want to illegally download it, you can do that too. So, Father Malone, this is something that kind of you and I were talking about, but I don't remember exactly. How did we come to wanting to talk about Bob Crane? Autofocus came up somewhere in some conversation we were having, and I was like, I've never watched it, always wanted to, but why are we talking about Bob Crane?
Well, you and I are on a different podcast called Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast. In a recent recording, we were talking about an episode where Bob Crane was a guest star in a segment.
Okay, that's what it was.
House with Ghost is the name of the episode from 1971. And you had mentioned that was the first time you had ever seen Bob Crane perform in anything, which kind of staggered Mike and I, who both are of a similar vintage and both grew up inundated with Hogan's Heroes. At least in my case, I know locally where I grew up in Boston, it was on every day, multiple times a day.
Right.
So I saw that series a lot, but you hadn't seen it, and you didn't. I don't know if you had. Well, you hadn't seen Autofocus either, right? So you didn't know the case existed either.
I knew of the case only because Entertainment Weekly in 2002 covered the movie at some point in some fashion. And I remember getting Entertainment Weekly growing up. So that's where I would have seen info about the movie. And again, I know what Hogan's Heroes is. I think I'm not young enough to have missed being introduced by my parents or knowing about vintage and classic TV. Because again, like I mentioned, I grew up watching a lot of I Love Lucy with my mom, which is older than this show. So it's not like I don't know about quote older shows, but this is not a show that I ever watched. And frankly, they mention it in the movie, but I want to mention it here. The idea for this show is not something that could be made like this today, primarily because it's just such a weird idea. Not a bad idea, but it is a strange idea for a comedy sitcom.
It's very unusual for it. They're not that far removed. It's about 20 years, less than 20 years since the end.
People still alive.
Most of the people involved in the making of the show were involved in the war. And everyone decided there's some comedy gold here if we set it in a prison camp. I mean, unfortunately, if you say camp in World War II, the immediate thought is concentration camp, which they litter throughout the movie. Every time anyone mentions the show to him, they say concentration camp, and he has to correct them. No, prison camp. Prison camp.
It's a POW camp.
Yeah. I mean, look, the show is essentially a sitcom version of Stalag 17, the sort of World War II prison camp flick.
It's kind of like Great Escape too, right? Like,
yeah. So it's less unheard of maybe at the time, but I don't know. I think you could do it today, honestly. I don't. Well, people say you can't get away with this or that or the other thing. As long as it's funny, no one will care.
I think more it would be people would be having the same quibble that you see in the movie, and I'm sure there was obviously in real life with the concentration camp. It's not a concentration camp, but again, like you don't want to joke about that, obviously. But I mean, again, I'm not going to say you can't, but just know what you're doing if you do it and understand the backlash that you will incur by doing it. But it doesn't mean you can't make a funny joke. Like, it's not inherently comedic.
I'm not advocating a show set in a concentration camp. I'm saying you could do a World War II POW camp.
Sure, I agree.
TV show.
But I'm saying I don't think you could do a concentration camp show. Like, that's not a thing that would ever happen.
No, we say that, but then people were like, you could never do a concentration camp movie, and they're like, it has been done, and it has been done with grace. So,
but only once, to be fair.
I'm not saying, again, not advocating a sitcom set in a concentration camp. Nor am I advocating even rewatching Hogan's Heroes. I mentioned I watched it ad nauseum as a child, like over and over and over again. And I remember the credit sequence vividly, but I could not tell you the plot of one episode of Hogan's Heroes. And that show ran for like 6 years or something like that. So there's a plethora of episodes and plot lines to choose from, and I have zero idea of any of them.
I mean, I feel like that could be the sentiment of a lot of shows from that time, right? Just, No,
but I remember that Gilligan switched brains with the professor, with the skipper at one point.
But that's one episode.
No, I can tell you the majority of the plot.
Okay, fair. But you know what I mean? Like, a lot of, there's still sitcoms. Like, the scenarios that they're mining in some of the cases are very quaint. Like, a lot of I Love Lucy stuff is like, I baked a loaf of bread too big, or the laundry machine is on the fritz. Like,
fair. It is situational comedy. So
right, but like, again,
a lot of the same situations are going to crop up.
Right, exactly. But I mean, with something like this, with Hogan's Heroes, you get a specific brand, style, and location of comedy that is to be expected. And again, I watched a couple episodes and it's fine. It's fine.
Harmless.
Right. Like, again, like I say you couldn't do it now only because I think people now are too sensitive about certain things, and they would get hung up on it's a camp in World War II, and they wouldn't, even if you explained it to them explicitly, they still wouldn't care. But yeah, watching it now, it's like, meh, whatever. It's just, you know what? It's just like if they set MASH somewhere else and it wasn't as good.
It's a mild catharsis of a show, It's like we're making buffoons of the villains of their youths,
Because the entire premise is that the Nazis are dopes, complete morons of the highest order.
Yeah, that are being played for the dummies that they are by these American prisoners. Like all the Nazis have is might. They have nothing else going for them. Right. So the Americans are trapped on that level alone. But within that level, they're able to pull the wool over their eyes and get what they want and dig tunnels and I don't know. I know there's some tunnel digging in there somewhere.
It's look, like a lot of things viewed now, it's very much of a time and of a place. Like this is not a thing that people are mining this way in 2023. Like, it's just, there are other things similar to this that will be mined now that will not be mined 60 years from now. And people will look back on now and say, well, they were doing this because of this, just like they were doing this because of World War II. And, it's a weird time capsule of a thing, right? But then we get to Bob Crane, who liked to fuck, folks.
He did.
I don't want to kink shame, and I don't want to call anybody out, but an unhealthy amount for someone of his visibility.
Well, he certainly couldn't get away with that these days now, could he?
I was going to ask you about that because okay, so we need to get a couple things out in the open here. Obviously, we're talking about the real life person and also the real life person as he's perceived through the eyes of Paul Schrader and the film, who is adapting from the Robert Graysmith book, who, and we've never talked about it on this show, I would like to at some point. Robert Graysmith has problems of his own regarding the Zodiac case and his kind of conclusion jumping. It's a mat that you jump to the conclusion on. That's what Graysmith did a little bit in Zodiac, and especially in Zodiac Unmasked. But this is, again, an unsolved murder that Graysmith is covering that someone is adapting into a movie that is fictionalized. So we're, again, talking about a real person, but we're also going to talk about the movie version of him that, again, the movie has a point that it's trying to make and it has a bias that it's going to be coming from, even if the filmmakers don't claim there is, but they're filmmakers, so there's got to be. But again, all that out of the way, Bob Crane in real life was what would we consider him now? A sex addict?
I think that's what he would be labeled now, definitely.
Right. Unfairly deserved or fairly deserved. Again, it's, the real life person is a lot more nuanced than the film, but Greg Kinnear in the film, I think, is uniquely suited to play that kind of character because I'm not saying that that's Greg Kinnear in real life, but Greg Kinnear has never struck me as the kind of person that I'd want to be around. Again, but I think that's just the roles that he's given. That's the energy he has. And that's a positive, because I'm sure the person that is Greg Kinnear is a wonderful human being, but he always has these roles where, like Bob Crane, you're about as disingenuous as you can be. In this movie and in this performance, you kind of get to see the reality poke through towards the end, but like Greg Kinnear always plays someone who may or may not be on the level, and it would seem they're not.
Yeah, I had said before I rewatched the movie when you and I were talking about it, I'd said that Greg Kinnear's perfect casting as Bob Crane. And on the surface, that's still true because both Bob Crane and Greg Kinnear are terrifically smug human beings. They just radiate that. But they also radiate a genuine charm. So as you're saying, it's kind of hard to know where you stand with them. So in that way, like there's no other person you could have cast for it.
Right.
But there seems to be a distance in Kinnear that you don't see in Bob Crane. Bob Crane seemed genuinely warm.
Right.
And Kinnear just seems genuinely distant. And that might just be the way the movie portrays him. Because we never get to really dig into the guy, even though we're getting all the beats of his life and we're getting all of the parts of his life, the unsavory parts of his life that they want to focus on. But we never get too close to him.
And that's why I wanted to mention this. It is a movie version, and the movie is going to take some stylistic liberties to prove a point or to reinforce a point or to hammer a point home. And I think that's one of them, is this like person that Bob Crane was outwardly. Because I watched some interviews with his son, because one of his sons, Bob Crane Jr., wrote a book about his dad recently and was talking about his dad. And his dad sounded like a wonderful human being, like sounded like a didn't treat his family poorly. I mean, look, he fucked around on his wife, obviously, but he seemed like he was, again, outwardly facing a warm person, which in the movie, they kind of try it and then it just never feels real. So it's like they drop it halfway through the movie.
And I think they keep coming back to it. They keep showing him being like Mr. Family Guy. But I think the problem is, as you just said, we're like, are we supposed to invest in that? Or are we supposed to invest in the other guy? Like, it's all sort of schizophrenic. We're kind of reviewing the movie here. We should just sort of tell what happens with Mr. Bob Crane in his life before we sort of dig into Paul Schrader's adaptation here and like how successful or not it is.
So Bob Crane, like we've mentioned, was on Hogan's Heroes for six seasons. And then effectively afterwards, his career, look, it happens to a lot of actors, right? You have one role, you're known for one role. And you know what? Like some actors would kill to have had a role that is 6 seasons of anything. But Bob Crane got it, made the most of it. He turned it into a show that got enough episodes to be syndicated. And if he had been alive long enough, he would have been a fucking multimillionaire. because he owned 25% of that fucking show. And
Wow.
right, 25% of $90 million in like the 90s. Imagine now, it's again, it's a shame, but Bob Crane's career ends up having a little bit of a downturn right around the time Hogan's Heroes ends, and he starts performing in dinner theaters and smaller productions. He's in a Disney film at one point,
An episode of Night Gallery,
where he's pretty good playing
a smug asshole.
playing A type. And then, as luck would have it, unfortunately, Bob Crane met a rather, I think the word we would use, ignominious end.
It's exactly the word I was thinking.
Yeah.
Mainly because it happened in Arizona.
Right. In Scottsdale, of all places, folks.
Yeah.
And we know what happens in Scottsdale, Arizona. Whole lot of golf playing and a whole lot of old white folks running around, enjoying being snowbirds, because I've been to Scottsdale, folks, as Father Malone has too, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I'm not trying to besmirch the entire state of Arizona. I like a great deal of it, but maybe not Scottsdale.
Right. Like, I don't think we're far off for maybe a large portion of the people of Arizona, because it's not even Phoenix the way it is. It's like where the hoi polloi and fake hoi polloi attempt to mince about with one another and be seen. I guess that's my perception of Scottsdale.
Have you been to Winslow, Arizona?
I've not.
They got a big crater there.
See, that's more interesting than playing golf.
I think so.
With Bob Crane, but Bob Crane probably wasn't playing a lot of golf.
If Bob Crane was playing golf, I'd want to go talk to Bob Crane, because ignominious end indeed. He's bludgeoned to death.
Oh, man.
It's awful.
Bludgeoned to death while sleeping.
Here's the thing, folks. So he had a good friend named John Carpenter, the director of Halloween.
Wow.
And
this is not the same person I was led to believe it was. This man has a fucking film career.
So he has this good friend named John Carpenter, who is a video whiz and video technician and equipment salesman, who is equipping him with the coolest hi-fis and the latest video technology and VTR and video cameras, and put them both together. You know, Bob Crane's burgeoning fame and his love of ladies. He's videotaping all of his sexual dalliances, and the dalliances break up his marriage, and then eventually threaten his career, because word gets out, like after Hogan's Heroes, the reason he's doing dinner theater is because this is a conceit of the movies. Like, I don't know how renowned.
You mentioned like we need to wait to talk about the movie, but again, like some of this is informed by the movie, which again, taking some of it with a grain of salt. He did do dinner theater, but
he certainly did. But you know,
the motivational stuff that we just can't know, because you can't know what you don't know, because we aren't Bob Crane and can't go ask him or be present for those things happening.
Yeah, you know, when Hal Linden was doing dinner theater, it was because no one was hiring Barney Miller because he was typecast. So in the early 1970s, I don't know anyone wants to hire Colonel Hogan. They've been watching him with buffooning Nazis for 7 years, like in everyone's home. He's like furniture, you know, like why would you cast him in anything? The movie posits that he couldn't get any other work because of this proclivity for sex. So anyway, in any event, he is very much into videotaping this is fact. He's into videotaping all the sexual dalliances with many, many, many women, photographing many, many of them, and ends up getting bludgeoned to death. And the main suspect is John Carpenter, who will eventually be tried by the police, but is found not guilty. And here we are today in this unsolved mystery and a movie based on a book.
And did you feel like the movie took a stand as to who it was? I have my answer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I feel like it did, but it was trying to not, in a way that like Zodiac did. Because Zodiac had the thing that I think is like the smartest way to do it, frankly, where Zodiac is played by like 3 or 4 different actors. It's not just one actor in the movie. Zodiac is played.
Yeah,
different.
but Zodiac calls it shot in that last scene where they bring back the dude who gets shot.
Sure.
And he points at John Carroll Lynch and goes, "That's him. That's the guy." And then the movie ends. It's like,
sure.
They make a very clear stance who they think the Zodiac is.
And I feel like that is in response to the Graysmith book doing the same thing.
Right. They were right to do it. In this one, they were. In this one, Paul Schrader obviously believes, and the script does too, that John Carpenter killed this guy. Like, it's the scene preceding it is basically a breakup scene between these two characters. The idea being, in the movie, as I sort of mentioned earlier, he can't get work because he has a reputation of being a pervert and sex addict and videotaper and peeper and all the terrible things. And so he is going to disassociate himself from John Carpenter, played by Willem Dafoe, in order to walk the straight and narrow and revive his career. And John Carpenter can't handle that because he can't get the chicks on his own. He needs Bob Crane's fame to make it happen. And in a fit of rage, kills Bob Crane. That's the movie. I mean, it's basically a breakup scene, and then Bob Crane has a bad dream, and then he gets bludgeoned to death.
I wish the movie had shown more restraint, but I get the narrative that the movie is telling, because the narrative of the reason so many people don't like Zodiac is because it is an unsolved fucking case. And the thing that they do at the end of the movie is to please the people that could not walk out of that movie theater going, "You mean they don't know who it is? And we just sat here for almost 3 hours and we don't have an answer?" Look, I get it. It blue balls the audience, but like, that's the reality, folks. Like, the reality is there is no answer. I mean, it's not, let me put it this way. With John Carpenter, in reality, it is not as clear and dried and obvious as the movie makes it seem.
Well, I disagree with you. I think John Carpenter is a murderer. He absolutely killed his career with Ghosts of Mars.
Amber Heard is the real murderer. She was the one who ended John Carpenter's career. Yeah. God.
You see that movie?
I saw enough of it to know I didn't want to finish it.
I've seen a lot of Facebook posts recently, like when John Carpenter gave some interview where he's like, "I'll come back, but I have a set of rules," or something like that. And people are like, "Oh, please come back." I'm like, "No, it's okay. Don't worry. Let him keep playing video games." Anyway,
haven't you made enough good movies that everybody loves? Like, what else do you need to do?
Yeah, he made great movies. Don't come back and ruin it at all. Don't do that. Anyway, back to the murderous John Carpenter.
It's not that I don't think he did it. It's just,
you wish the movie didn't spend 2 hours leading us to that inevitability.
No, I have no problem with the movie doing it because, again, it's a movie. Like, it has an agenda. Like, and that's look.
Are you castigating Graysmith here? Are you castigating the movie for?
I don't think I'm castigating. I guess I'm castigating the audience expectation that the filmmakers feel that they need to serve. But here it makes sense because there's one person that is overwhelmingly a person of interest. With Zodiac, it's like there are plenty of people. It's like, how many people were in the San Francisco Bay Area and when those murders were taking place, and then the ones that aren't women, but there you go. Then you've got the pool of people realistically, and then you can go further down, but it's still a lot of people. This, it's like, it could have been him, maybe his ex-wife, and again we get into what's effectively alien speculation in the alien camp, where it's like it could be aliens, and this is like it could be a hit from somebody's boyfriend who is mad that he's fucking that person's wife.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
That for me in cases like this feels like the same, like it could have been aliens. It's like, well, of course it could have been that. Like, duh. But that's not a fun thing to speculate, because then you've essentially opened it up to everybody in Scottsdale. Like, there you go.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Bob Crane was prolific, if nothing else.
Right. So, I mean, I don't think there's anybody who's a better suspect than John Carpenter.
Yeah. I mean, look, they don't show Willem Dafoe swinging the wrench or the pipe or whatever the hell it is.
Tripod.
Oh, it's a tripod. Right. How beautiful.
Which is something they only found out in the 90s when they started revisiting the case and researching it. The guy that they brought in was like, let me look at the smear marks, because in the real murder, the murderer wipes the tripod off on the sheets. And he was like trying to figure out. So he compared the smear marks on several items and it was a tripod.
Wow.
which is very on brand if John Carpenter did kill him.
Come on, like
you fucking you Shakespearean shit. Like, come on.
A tripod is not the item you want to pick up and smack somebody with. Like, I don't care how heavy it was. It's probably aluminum or something. Like,
yeah, you would have to hit it pretty hard. I mean, right? Like, I would expect something like that's going to like bend before it kills someone. Like,
I'm sure this is like what the early 70s. It was probably really heavy.
Yeah, it was like made out of like steel or something. Yeah, swing it real hard and clock them real. I mean, that's the thing. You can find the crime scene photos online. If you watch the movie, you don't really have to because they more or less recreate it. Like,
yeah, it's horrific.
It's awful.
Beautiful. But,
yeah.
But terrible.
Beautiful in its grotesquerie. I mean, it's grotesque. But he just gets bludgeoned. There's no torturing, drawing, and quartering, nothing. It's just being clocked over the head, but somehow it ends up being terrible, grotesque. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't need to see all the build up to the fucking event. Like, you can make the event shocking enough that seems lazy the other way. Well, Paul Schrader is he's a hell of a filmmaker.
Right. And he loves talking about the male psyche, doesn't he?
He does. That's where he spends a lot of his time. So,
I mean, this movie in a lot of ways is a spiritual sequel to Hardcore, right? Like,
yeah, but
the underbelly of Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul Schrader is just interested in the underbelly of everything.
Right. That's fair. But it's very male centric, especially with this.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really think of. Well, I guess Light Sleeper. He's kind of a co-lead in Susan Sarandon, but yeah. I mean, all of his leads seem to be dudes.
It's the experience he can speak to as a white male, like
right. So yeah, I mean, he's writing what he knows, I guess. But he also wrote the part of Jesus for the Last Temptation of Christ. So, but as the ultimate white interpretation of Jesus. But every one of his movies are deeply spiritual movies. Like I read something about Martin Scorsese. Somebody said about Martin Scorsese's movies that his films are all about the wrong ways we look for God. And I believe that to some extent, but really the Martin Scorsese movies that embody that sentiment are the ones written by Paul Schrader. And those continue in all of Paul Schrader's movies. All of his characters are always looking for God in some way, and sometimes in baffling ways, and sometimes
literally in hardcore. Like,
yeah. I mean, the hardcore is the sort of most sort of, I don't know, obvious. I don't like that movie.
I mean, I get it. I'm not sure I'm a fan of it. It's fine. I like George C. Scott, but like he's also his own bundle of fun.
Right. But, all of Schrader's movies are kind of a piece. They are very male centric, but I think more than that, they're more a yearning toward God in whatever underbelly our lead character seems to find themselves in, and this one's no exception.
And what's interesting is juxtaposing the world of high technology against the world of, I guess, the underbelly smut creation world, and the kind of weird history that this movie, I mean, again, it taps into it, of the how the technology is following along with Bob Crane's life, and his, I guess, perversion grows stronger and stronger the better the technology is getting.
Yeah, where like again, the movie, I'm not taking the movie at its word that they know these things about these people necessarily, but like it's very interesting where our lead has spent his life sort of as a hobby at this point, because he's when the film starts, in his life, in his career, he's a successful DJ, and at night plays drums at like strip clubs, basically, which he's not getting any money out of that. He's just doing it because he likes playing drums and he likes being in that environment. But and I'm sure if he's a cheater, eventually he was cheating already with whatever, like,
right. I assume he was. I mean, I assume, and by I assume I mean go look. It in real life he was photographing his sexual dalliances long before.
Right.
What's unsurprising, right? This is not behavior that was like, oh, it just happened one day. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah. So is the movie like just a sneaky condemnation of the availability of pornography it escalates you and your behavior, you know, like once it became readily available for watching, right? Not so much the videotaping of it. Like once he could watch it, like he became so obsessed with that and the lifestyle it entailed that his manager, his agent, played by Ron Liebman, who shows up every 20 minutes to go, "What the fuck are you doing?" Basically. His manager telling him, like, your career's going to go away. People are talking about you doing this. And anyone in Hollywood in fear of their career evaporating would stop doing those things. But Bob Crane just looks like, nah, fuck it. So it seems like the movie might be a condemnation of that. Or is it trying to figure out who this guy is in the face of all of it? Like the murder in the film almost seems an afterthought. Like, it's not a mystery. Like, I keep saying it, like, labeled as sort of this docudrama mystery thriller. And
but it spends the whole movie showing you what the conclusion is going to be.
Right.
The best endings for movies are the endings that are essentially, like you said, an afterthought, or with a different parlance, even an inevitability. Like, yeah. It's an afterthought because it's an inevitability. It's an inevitability because again, like you said, there's no question it's Willem Dafoe in the movie.
Right.
It's inevitable. Like, it's an afterthought because, like, that's what they're getting to. It's the journey getting there.
Right. So, but in that journey along the way, what is Schrader even trying to say to us here? Like, is he saying that thing is the technology exacerbates this problem, or is the thing even a problem? It's when he tries to stop that he gets murdered, but he gets murdered by the thing. I don't know. The movie's a lot deeper than it sort of lets on in the surface. But the problem with the movie, not to change gears when I'm asking questions or anything, but the problem with the movie ultimately is we never feel any strong connection with Bob Crane as a person. He just seems to sort of cipher because he's presented supposedly as he was, which is this deeply depraved guy who was also the most decent human being. And like, it doesn't do anything with that information. It just sort of presents it. Like, the fact that he was both these things is a fascinating thing and is worth exploring, and it doesn't really do it. It just sort of shows the two. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, I was going to address kind of what you're getting at. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I don't think it really cares about Bob Crane. The movie does in a lot of ways. Like, he's not. It's less about him and more about what he represents in the grand context of, like, the underbelly of Hollywood, or just Hollywood at the time and the world that he lived in, treating someone like that. But again, I think it's more trying to speak universally and less just using Bob Crane as the vehicle through which to do it. Which, I mean, again, like Last Temptation of Christ essentially did the same thing with Jesus. Like, it's not like it's an unknown thing to do it. That's normally the point of a movie that's done well, is you're not just retelling the life of the person, but using it to contextualize something you're talking about in a way that is easier to digest than just writing it down and expecting somebody to have the wherewithal to understand it. So I feel like Bob Crane gets lost in his own movie because I don't think he was that exciting in real life in the way the movie wants him to be. And his own kid kind of makes it seem that way. And yes, maybe he's downplaying his father a little bit for the sake of himself, but he also did write a book about his dad titled like Sex Something Else and like an Unsolved Murder, My Father, Bob Crane. It's like, it's not like he's not willing to be open and honest because everybody knows it now. Like, it's out in the open thanks to something like the movie and the fact that he was a big time actor on a big time show that got murdered long before he should have died because he's 49.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Yikes.
49, man. Like, dude didn't look 49 in the movie either. When they show like old Bob Crane, it's like he looks like he's like a 60-year-old man too. It's like they try to make Bob Crane not important in his own story because the other stuff, the ruminations on these things are more important, which I get. I mean,
which they could do, but we spend an inordinate amount of time with Bob Crane and come away kind of with nothing because I guess my problem with the film is I do find this idea that he's a decent family man and a hedonist of the highest order at night, because I'm not kink shaming him at all. I say go for whatever the fuck you want.
Fucking same.
Yeah, like go for it. But at the time, I can definitely see where you don't want word of that getting out, and it might have repercussions on your career and your reputation and your family and whatever.
Let's contrast Bob Crane's life with someone else that's more contemporary. That is less, again, it's not a lesser or more question. Armie Hammer.
Yeah.
Right? There's a pretty good analog here, right? At least when we're talking about the levels of behavior and depravity, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Bob Crane was just fucking in orgies.
Right.
And again, that's the way the movie presents it. Maybe he was up to all sorts of really depraved stuff outside of that. The movie also paints Bob Crane as not down with the LGBTQIA plus movement at all, which, again, it works narratively for the story they're telling. That's for sure. But again, like how close that is to the reality of Bob Crane, we will never know, because he would never be honest about what he was doing in any of those things. Because again, look what happened to people who were at the time.
Yeah. What's the question here? Ultimately, the people of the 1960s and early 70s did not want their sitcom star to be having orgies and videotaping it and taking photographs of young ladies.
Is the problem the videotaping and the taking of pictures, or is it the problem that he was having orgies?
All of it. It's okay. All of it.
How much of that would be acceptable now?
None of it. I think, I don't know, because Hefner was doing it for years. He got away with it,
That's
right?
That's what I mean. That's what I'm asking.
Gee, I don't know.
Again, like that's why I say Armie Hammer, because like Armie Hammer is like a sexual assault thing is also rolled into it, which is why it's a bad example in a lot of ways, because Bob Crane doesn't have sexual assault written all over it. But Armie Hammer, take the sexual assault part out and just talk about
let's take the sexual assault part out because it might be worth taking out, honestly, because he's hitting back now. I'm sure you've seen, like he's starting to give interviews now.
Sure. I mean, what a surprise. It's been a year.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. It's a year. Yeah, I can come back.
But I do want to. I agree with you about this. In this case, like if he actually assaulted anyone, then fuck him and bury him, right?
Yeah.
But if it's not that, if it's the conversations he's been having with people online, then everyone needs to shut their fucking mouths, because it's all kink shaming. It really is, on like a grand scale.
I agree. I mean, again, it's thought crimes, right? Like it's
yeah. I don't have cannibal fantasies, okay? But as a writer, I might have to write something like that. Right? Does that make me a fucking lunatic who doesn't deserve to like make a living ever again? Like,
I think that should be the title of your first album. I don't have cannibal fantasies. and then you on the album eating a leg.
And then like Nimoy, years later, I'll release another album. They'll say, as it turns out, I do have
cannibal fantasies. Yeah, I mean, why not? Right?
Yeah,
lean into it.
Like. Again, I don't understand that particular kink, but like I'm sure most people wouldn't understand mine, and I don't want you to, and I don't give a shit if you do or not, and we shouldn't have to do with him either. Let him be the Lone Ranger too.
Him and Johnny Depp together on screen again, boy, they'll be out in droves.
What a coup to get them back together in a movie.
Oh my!
I'd go see it. just
for the constant like metatextual nature of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I'm with you. You know, again, if Armie Hammer is a prolific sexual assaulter and committing that kind of violence against people, yeah, fuck him right out of existence. But if that's not the case, and again, I'm not saying it is or isn't, I don't know the facts of that case. We're just using him as an example for the other part, which is thought crimes regarding your kinks. Bob Crane was doing these things, I'm sure. But what he was doing now is rather pedestrian feeling. Like
it all seems very consensual with a bunch of like obviously like a similar group. Like there's a scene in the flick where he like walks in, he's like, "Hey, what's going on, Tony? Hey, Janet." Like, you know,
it
it's
just drops trow right in front of him, no questions. Like,
so you know, he basically belongs to an orgy group. Who gives a shit?
Right. Like, you know what, folks? If you don't believe that this is a thing in your town, go to the grocery store, take a pineapple from the shelf and turn that fucker upside down in your cart and just walk around the store and see the looks you get from some people. Because some people will know what that means.
Some.
Some,
Not all.
but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be all.
But here's the thing, like, so, but it is some, not all, because some people, I think it would be more acceptable these days if this were occurring. It would be doubly acceptable if he was a musician, though.
Right. Right.
Like, just automatically, like, you go, like, they were having orgies and videotaping, like, yeah.
Brett Michaels, like,
yeah, exactly. Like any rock stars, like,
the Bangles, like,
part of the job, right? Like,
groupies, hangers-ons, like, yes, you're there to bang, and like, I don't. Since when is part of that not being an actor as well? If that's something you want to do because you're an actor, you have the visibility. That means people are going to be interested in you. Go for it. Just don't rope other people into your bullshit that don't want to be part of it, like significant others.
You could get away with it now, though, because there are more options available to you. You got to remember, in like 1972, his options were 3 networks, and like 5 studios. And that's it. And if they've decided the public sees you as a deviant and they don't want to deal with you anymore, we certainly don't want to, then you're done.
Right. No,
like, now you can go to some streaming service and go, yeah, I'm the guy that has orgies. But I've got this good idea for a show. They'd be like, good, let's do that show. And we like the controversy.
You would lead with the, hey, I do orgies, by the way.
Yeah.
Hey, this room, this pitch room is kind of like the orgy I was in last night. Just a lot less sex, like.
Just lead with it. You could. Like, there's a company out there that will deal with you nowadays.
It's probably Vice or Netflix, maybe.
Netflix, definitely.
They strike me as the ones that are the most open to orgies in the office.
Oh, yeah.
God. Look, I mean, yeah, at the time, I mean, it's funny. They mentioned Bobby Darin in the movie.
Yeah.
Which is, again, similar, no murder, but, possible deviancy could be leveled against him, I guess, by people.
No. We can level it all at the guy who portrayed him in that horrible movie, Kevin Spacey. Jesus Christ! Unfortunately, sullied the whatever good name of Bobby Darin existed is now, unfortunately, inextricably linked in my mind. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin Spacey.
Next time I hear Beyond the Sea, I got to think of your ugly mug showing up here in Las Vegas and booking yourself into a hotel for a week performing as Bobby Darin. This happened. He did this.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yikes! But Bobby Darin would have been considered a deviant at the time. Yeah,
was he? What was he doing?
I thought he was having like 3 ways.
Was he? Good for him. Free love.
Isn't that the thing though? Like, that's my response. It's like, awesome.
Yeah, but again, 2023 versus 1960 something.
Sure. But, I mean, again, I'd like to think a version of me then would be as progressive as I am now, for fuck's sake.
Look, it's always been going on. It's just a matter of discretion, I think.
Well, visibility, right?
Yeah.
And the expectation, like, I think if you're in the arts, it's expected that you could maybe lean a little bit more in a free living way. But I think we're never going to have a politician anytime in my lifetime that says I have orgies all the time. Elect me for fucking state rep. I mean, maybe in this day and age, it wouldn't be that far off from reality with some of the shit that some people say. But I mean, again, people in this country get really weird about sex. Like, it sucks because, there's no reason to be icky about it. It's literally part of life.
Look, we've come a long way. But there's miles to go yet.
We've moved inches, but miles need to be traveled. Like,
yeah, basically.
I mean, progress is measured in inches, not in miles. And I mean, look, it's like marijuana, right? Like, it's more socially acceptable now than it ever has been. But it was always socially acceptable. Just the people that weren't socially acceptable with it were fucking loud and constant about it.
Yeah, and legislative.
Right. I feel for Bob Crane in the movie only because if he was alive now, doing with the visibility that he had then, nobody would care.
Yeah. At the same time, this time watching the movie, I don't know, this must be factual, but like, he's married, he's got children, he gets on to Hogan's Heroes. Whatever affairs he's been having are ramped up geometrically now. And that ends his first marriage. He then takes up with the girl from Hogan's Heroes.
Right.
And marries her and then continues secretly having this lifestyle. And all I could think is, like, this ended your first marriage. Shouldn't you just come clean with the second girl and just be like, look, here's the deal. My marriage is ending because of the fucking orgies, and the orgies are going to continue. Do you want to be my girl? Because it still seems the same. Like, where are you going, Bob?
I'm with you. Like, if it had been me, I would have been like, I wouldn't have gotten married the second time. What's the point? I mean, again, but it's again,
Didn't seem any reason. But then we weren't delving too hard into those relationships. Those two characters seem like ciphers. They just seem like mirror images of each other.
I mean, again, I think also it's a presenting thing, right? Like you have to present yourself as the family man, as the good God-fearing Christian man who has a wife and kids. Like, it's partially that. Again, why now it wouldn't matter, because it doesn't matter now. As if it mattered then, it only mattered to vocal people who made decisions, not necessarily legislative. So, I mean, the heads of the studios, if they had seen that, would have been like, okay, yeah, right. We're not going to stake anything on you. You're unreliable because you're not a nuclear family man. So,
yeah, that's true.
Which is why Willem Dafoe's character is so much more the actual main focus of the piece.
Yeah, or as Mike White pointed out, the movie is really a one long fetish reel for bygone technology.
Right.
Like
masturbatory.
Yeah, the loving detail of like the opening of cases and the gleaming equipment within is sexier than any of the actual sex presented in the movie. It's all pretty bloodless, but oh man, those cameras.
Yeah, instead of semen, the film uses film reel to stand in for ejaculation. I mean, it's like it's that masturbatory with the technology of the time. Like I mean, to the point where we have a scene of Willem Dafoe coming out that he's colorblind.
Yeah.
Like it goes that far to be like even the people of the time and with the technology are unable to fully understand it. Like,
yeah,
but yet they're obsessed with it.
Michael McKean popping in. Michael McKean and Ed Begley both right. Showing up. Ed Begley as the world's most unlikely Jew.
Right. Also didn't realize that Richard Dawson was on Hogan's Heroes until I watched it today, and realized that that's who that actor was attempting to play in the movie. Attempting being the key word. Yeah,
he wasn't doing a great job. He marginally looked like him and sounded nothing like him.
Right. Richard Dawson, another interesting fella, almost like, here's the actual question. How is what Richard Dawson was doing okay when it's effectively like out in the open version of Bob Crane without the fucking?
Well, because Richard Dawson was a swinging bachelor from England.
He's British, folks. That's why.
But also didn't take the step of recording it all. Somehow the recording of it is the more damning part, right?
Is it the recording or the sharing?
Both.
I know, but like if you record all of it and keep it for yourself, what does it matter?
Right. But even still, word is getting out that you're doing it.
But it's only getting out if you're showing people that you have them after the fact. Because that's like they make a point in the movie. They make a point of it. How many like common lay people saying they're fucking Bob Crane and he's videoing things is going to matter to anybody?
Right. You'd have to see it, wouldn't you?
Right. You'd have to be like, oh, look, there's a video of Bob Crane being blown by someone.
Like, again, I don't know.
Now somebody would sell that for money if they found it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've seen plenty of other celebrities doing things just like that, and they have careers still, and they maybe even have careers because of it.
Right. Again, I'd like to know how much is fictionalized in the film. Like, how much of this was actually affecting anything? Like, maybe they were videotaping everything and they were fucking discreet about it. Maybe nobody knew anything about it. Like, his wife finds out or whoever. But like, is it as prevalent as the movie was attempting to? Like I said, Ron Liebman shows up every 20 minutes to go, this stuff is going to destroy your career. Was it destroying his career, or was it a simple matter of typecasting where nobody wanted Colonel Hogan? That's
why I feel like the movie loses Bob Crane, because Bob Crane ends up being not important. And that's an important question that should have been asked and addressed in the movie, even if it's the movie addressing it, not real life addressing it. Like, the movie could have taken a stance on it.
Well, it makes the decision that it was this thing.
Right. And like, it couldn't have just been that.
Yeah, and then he takes pains to shun it at the end, and that's what ends up killing him.
Which again, like, I'm not even sure if that was the case, because when in the documentary on the on the movie, they talk about, yeah, he was kind of like done with John Carpenter and it was like kind of sick of him because he was kind of annoying. But like, okay, like, all right, like that doesn't sound like someone who's like, I'm gonna fucking murder you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and again, look, and can we just get this out because we haven't mentioned it? The movie is like gay baiting the entire fucking time. And like it, not like it made me uncomfortable, not like I'm ashamed of the fact that it did it or like ashamed for the movie, but like, what was the point like of doing it? I just don't get it.
Which part specifically?
Well, the whole like, oh, it's an orgy, man, no big deal. Like, oh, it's no big deal. And then the breakup scene that is, again, it's literally a breakup scene between two men, but one of the men doesn't realize it's a breakup scene.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's like gay baiting. Like it's like the whole idea of the movie of what is it taking a stand on is the problem here. It's like, well, we're just going to say maybe he was gay and maybe he was in love with him and maybe that motivated him too. Maybe not, though. We don't know. It's like John Carpenter was married just like Bob Crane was. Maybe he was. Maybe that was the case. Maybe there was a unrequited gay love between them. But when people are saying, he just kind of found him annoying, it's not like, he found him annoying and overbearing and wanting to, grab his ass constantly. Like, I feel like Bob Crane would have said that just to make sure that dude was further thrown under the bus to get away from, because that's the way the movie paints it.
Yeah. Look, ultimately, yes, it can be interpreted that way, certainly, and it could have been a possibility for sure. What the movie posits, and I guess what the sort of criminal investigation is based on, is the idea that he was removing himself from Carpenter's life, and this lifestyle was going to end. And in a fit of rage, Carpenter kills him. But like, Carpenter, even in the film, is presented as this creepy guy who's at all the stag parties and every, the
thing with the watch.
That's what I'm thinking of specifically. He has this watch that it's a digital watch. It shows you the time, and then it shows this guy with a giant boner, thrusting. And he's like, it's time to fuck. Like, that's his pickup line. Now, obviously, that's a terrible pickup line, and they show the girl being disgusted by it and walking away. But, that he's used that line a lot, and it's worked. At some point,
right?
It's worked. So, yeah. Like, he's getting a higher class of young lady with Bob Crane at his side, but his lifestyle's not going to change at all. He's still going to get girls and videotape them at his pad, like naive idiots who think a boner watch is somehow sexy.
And that's my point. It's like, I don't think he actually had any problem getting women because, again, getting women is not what a orgy party is. They're there. There's nothing to get. You show up and you have fun and you leave. Nobody's getting anybody anything. You're all there tacitly agreeing that's what you're doing. Like, you could bring someone with you or meet someone there, but it's not I'm going to get somebody there and out in the wild. Like, that's not what this is. And that's not what they paint it as. And that's kind of not what I believe was going on. I believe it was just a bunch of orgies all the time with a bunch of people they probably sort of halfway knew. And maybe they met people on the road. I'm sure they did, but I'm sure they were constantly doing stuff where they lived constantly.
And there's got to be a scene and
right. Of course.
Basically.
There is now, and that's with the internet. I mean, because the internet didn't exist then, there was no way to figure out how to get there. I'm sure it was harder, but there had to have.
But is the lack of Bob Crane's sort of prestige mean that they've kicked John Carpenter, creator of Escape from New York, out of the community?
In reality, I don't think so. In the movie's reality, that's the logic it goes with. That's movie logic.
Right.
Do you think that in reality that would have been the case?
No, definitely not. I think if they were tolerating him, then they were tolerating him,
But the gay baiting also goes to the thing that Bob Crane makes for John Carpenter, that weird movie that pisses him off to no end. Because again, it's what are you implying? Again, in the orgy scene, I wouldn't think anybody would care, is my point. Right. in my mind, Bob Crane was bisexual just by design. He's in an orgy setting. Those people, I wouldn't feel give a shit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception is you're having an orgy with people. I don't think you're really you're not getting hung up on the same things people that are wanting to be monogamous are.
No,
just
but
by design.
But Bob thought he was godly and a family man who, while yes, he is going to engage in multiple sexual female partners with men thrown into the mix, he's not going to touch or be touched by other men.
Apparently not. Again, that's the way the movie portrays it. I just don't believe that was the real person.
And that probably happened. I bet that did. Just him like putting his foot down about it because he had to say it out loud because of his, version of masculinity. But I don't know that the movie needed to make the point of it, other than to draw us toward the notion that these two are in a relationship, including a breakup scene.
Right. And look, I mean, ultimately, like we've said, it takes kind of a pretty direct stance on who they think killed Bob Crane. And look, John Carpenter went to trial. You mentioned it. He was tried for Bob Crane's murder and he was acquitted because they did not have evidence. It was a circumstantial case.
Yeah.
They had blood on the car, but right? Yeah, it was like 20 years after. He was tried and acquitted in 90. He was tried and acquitted in 94.
Oh yeah, then it's like forever. Like even if there was a smoking gun somewhere, like they'd still have trouble convicting. I would think
they found a piece of human flesh matter in in John Carpenter's car that they tried to DNA test, and they couldn't get the DNA information. And again, I don't know if they've done anything recently with it, but that may have been Bob Crane, a piece of Bob Crane in the car that was on his clothes that maybe came off. There was blood on John Carpenter's car that was a base match for the blood type that was Bob Crane's.
What are we doubting here? Obviously, John Carpenter, director of Big Trouble in Little China, murdered Bob Crane.
I mean, the signs would point to yes, but again, he didn't get convicted. He died a normal heart attack death outside of prison in 1998. I mean, 4 years after he died. He didn't go to jail. He never served time. Again, if he did it, then he died anyways, and he, whatever. 4 years is not that long. He was an older man, but the documentary posits that his family lived until till older than that, till they were 100. So it's weird that he died at 70. Okay. Again, anecdotal evidence is anecdotal evidence. But
are they trying to say that he was murdered?
No, they were trying to say that like the stress of the case took a toll on him.
Oh, really? I would think creating Memoirs of an Invisible Man would have created a stress that would have killed him.
I'm so glad that you and I were thinking the same thing every time they said his name.
It's absurd. I mean, when he introduces himself, John Carpenter, and then Greg Kinnear sings "If I Was a Carpenter." Oh,
again, is that not gay baiting?
Yes, I guess it is.
Right?
I guess from the beginning, Schrader is setting up their relationship, but why not go all the way with it?
Again, because in my brain, the person that Bob Crane really was probably did. Because again, if you're getting to that point, I just don't see why you would care. The only thing you would care about is being found out. But if you're being found out about the orgy thing, it's like, that's already pissing people off. Like, okay, and then you're gay too. Like, if you're gay and orgies, like, which is worse? Clearly, per the movie's logic, one was already bad enough as it is.
Okay, so the facts of the case state that Crane was disassociating himself from John Carpenter because he found Carpenter to be annoying, right?
Right, like just didn't want to deal with him anymore.
Right, but the movie makes it seem like he's doing it because he doesn't want to be part of the scene anymore. But could it be that he just didn't want to be part of John Carpenter's scene anymore, but wanted to continue with the scene, and thus was in fact going to get him kicked out of the scene? Because if they had presented that in the movie, it would make a lot more sense. Like, I'm going to continue living this lifestyle with this community that we've engaged in, and I don't want you there anymore, and no one will accept you anymore because I'm Bob Crane and you're nobody.
Do you think Bob Crane was actually turning his life around and stopping his lifestyle after his wife had divorced him? No, me either. He was
ramping up, if anything.
Right. Like maybe he was getting rid of Bob Crane from his life, but going to go on his own. Because here's the thing. Crane may have been holding him, Jesus Christ. Carpenter may have been holding Crane back from being able to go to those kinds of places that only Bob Crane could go to.
That's true.
Ditch your friend, John Carpenter. He's weirdo and gives people weird vibes, but you, Bob Crane, you're cool. Like, again, why is that so hard to believe?
Yeah, I believe it more. They should have gone in that direction with this script.
I mean, again, I don't, again, script is one thing, real life, like those things make more sense in real life because real life doesn't work like a movie. Like real life is so far removed from the logic that this movie is going for. And I don't know if Bob Crane would have been put off by someone who was a man being halfway intimate towards him when he's already being intimate with large groups of people all at once anyway.
Should the movie have been more salacious?
I mean, again, how salacious do you think he was in real life?
I think pretty fucking salacious.
Right. I think so too. Like, again, like,
you think we should have gotten more of the crazy?
I think it would have made maybe what ends up happening to him seem more like a rabid dog being put down. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's like
it would have hurt our impression of him had we seen more of the insanity he was engaged in.
It's like that Freddie Mercury.
I think it would have done the opposite
thing, right?
for me. Yeah, well, the Freddie Mercury thing is completely absurd that they didn't dive headfirst into that. Like, you don't think Freddie Mercury wouldn't have wanted us to see that? He would have.
Bacchanalia? Like, yeah.
Yeah, of course he would have. And I wanted to see it. God damn it. And I wanted to see this here in autofocus.
Bob Crane Jr.'s son said that his dad would talk about his Fellini adventures. What else could that mean?
I want to know.
Right. But like, what do you think of when you think of that? Like Bacchanalia and people just being free. Like,
yeah,
like
totally.
I can only imagine what Bob Crane was up to because you know what? Like this doesn't even come close to the reality, I'm sure. And that's okay. Like, again, if everything was consensual and everybody was above board, it literally does not matter. One singular fucking iota.
Was there any rights issue? Did they have to like get permission from anybody for this movie? Like, I wonder that. Like, you know, they had to like make the case, like make us understand in that one scene that like, I'm not into this. I'm not a gay.
His son, Scotty Crane, apparently says that there's plenty of the movie that's not factual, like him being into BDSM. Also, apparently the movie does make a truth conflation. Bob Crane apparently did not have a penile implant per his autopsy, not finding one.
But he told everyone he did.
Right. I mean, again, the movie makes a point to show Willem Dafoe looking at, which is a great scene. I mean, it makes for great comedy, at least. So there is that.
By the way, Willem Dafoe doing his impression of Werner Klemperer's Colonel Klink is the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The Hogan with the monocle, like that's nightmare fuel.
I mean, you know, as much as we talked about Bob Crane in the movie, like, again, it really is John Carpenter's movie. And that's because Willem Dafoe it's Willem Dafoe. You put him in anything. And the reason those Spider-Man movies are remembered so fondly, and really only one of them in a lot of ways, is because Willem Dafoe is so good. That's the reason he came back, is because he's Willem Dafoe. And he's just a talented actor. And he could elevate anything.
Great in this movie.
Yeah. Playing a fictionalized version of a real person who may or may not have been like that.
The scene where he's composing the score for The Fog is amazing.
I swear to God. I will say that John Carpenter in real life, the real person who did not write the score for Halloween, the person who may have killed Bob Crane, they did a service to him by casting Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, they did.
Right.
Yeah.
You could sit and say Willem Dafoe's a weird looking dude.
No, and the character as written is like 1000% creep. And there are certainly levels of that on display, but he doesn't seem completely like, and it's because of the charm of Willem Dafoe ultimately. Like, right. Yeah, he's a creep, but you know, it's Willem Dafoe. Like, you know, he's
kind of, that's like creeps the expectation.
Yeah.
Do you think John Carpenter, the person, was more or less than the version of the movie? Like the real tangible man that existed? I bet he was 1,000 times more charming. I bet that. Right. I'm with you. It feels like the reality was Bob Crane and John Carpenter were a lot more charismatic together than the movie tries to portray them as, because it always feels one-sided. Pains to try and show them like as a team. Right. And I think they were both more charismatic outside of one another than they were the way the movie says. Because like the point of showing Willem Dafoe is like failing is because it's like, well, he needs Bob there. And it's like, I think John Carpenter was doing what Bob Crane was doing, just like Bob Crane was long before they met and long after. I'm sure John Carpenter was continuing to do it. And it would strike me that John Carpenter's wife didn't have a problem with it because she was married to him until he died.
There you go.
Again, like you said, he's probably a lot more amiable of a person.
Must have been.
Right? To look like that and get as much ass as he supposedly got.
Yeah.
And he's not like a stunner, but like Bob Crane's a good looking guy. This dude, not just like a dude. Like
actual John Carpenter?
No, not Fu Manchu, facial hair with long ass old man hair, John Carpenter. No, other John Carpenter.
He's not that good looking either when you think about it.
I'm not saying he is.
For the features you just mentioned.
Right. I described someone much more dashing. But that's my point. I like you said, I think he would have to have something else other than looks because he was just a guy. Like nothing set him apart from other people.
Yeah, that dazzling equipment. Like let's face it, that stuff was the state of the art. It was like, nobody had a videotape recorder in their home. It was unheard of.
Right.
So, he shows up with all the lights and the camera and the razzle dazzle. Like that goes a long way to seducing the type of people who want to appear on camera while you have sex, I should think.
I would assume so. It's like, wow, he's got the technology. It's maybe a sly comment on how porn really does drive the technology, right? I mean, that's why Blu-ray is what it is. That's why DVD is what it is or was. Porn went with DVD over Betamax. Porn went with Blu-ray over HD DVD, and that's why we have what we have.
Oh, wait, but porn drives all our technologies.
I mean, I don't think Paul Schrader was commenting on that, but I'm not sure what he was commenting on, frankly.
Yeah, I think he was, but he never seems to be clucking his tongue at anybody, which is something I like about Paul Schrader. Like, because in all the wrong ways people are looking for God, he respects the journey and the search for it.
I agree. And I think the dream sequences that he gives Bob Crane are probably some of the better parts of the movie for me, because it's the time where the movie actually kind of is maybe trying to say something about Bob Crane in a roundabout way. Maybe it doesn't necessarily hit that, but like that's the moment you get to see inside of Bob Crane.
It's the only time we seem to stop and try and get inside his head, quite literally. Most of the time he just seems to be this character sort of moving through the events of this guy's life, and
he's a character.
Yeah, we're not really investing all that much in him, but they're trying to tell a lot of story here.
Yeah,
too much. You need to focus a little bit, laser focused in, which is the purview of two of the producers of this movie, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, are the best biopic writers of all time, because they figured out the formula, which is don't tell the person's whole life. Figure out the most interesting part of them and just tell that story. And this movie comes close to that, but it needs to have been even more focused on what it wanted to talk about, which is, again, less the murder and more this guy's fascination with technology and sex and where is that going and what is it doing to him and what is it eventually doing to society. That was what the movie should have been about.
I agree, because the intersection of that is, that's Bob Crane as the symbol in this movie for where the script would have been.
Right. This movie needed to be directed by like David Cronenberg. It needed to be directed by a fetishist and not somebody who's a spiritualist like Paul Schrader. I mean, Paul Schrader makes this script what it is. It's like he made the movie as written, but it ultimately isn't about the murder, and it isn't necessarily about this guy's struggle between being a good family man and being a deviant. It's about the technology and that coupled with the lifestyle. And it needed a different filmmaker to bring that out.
I agree. I think it's a perfectly fine movie. I just wish that the things about Bob Crane had been more feeling like they're taking a stand or something to say that's at least interesting. It feels kind of like, I've heard something like, I've heard this tune before. Maybe not this exact same note, but again, an obsessive. Yeah. All right. I see where you're going with that story, but like, there's more to that story, this story, than just he's an obsessive. Like, yeah, he's an obsessive about whatever he wants in that moment, be it sex, be it photography, be whatever. But like, there's more to it.
It's all sex. It's all sex, ultimately.
Ultimately.
A day without sex is a day wasted. That's their refrain. They say it a lot in the movie.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So I guess you're of the ilk then that John Carpenter, not the director of Assault on Precinct 13, the original, is the one who murdered Bob Crane, allegedly?
I think John Carpenter, director of Starman, did murder Bob Crane
for taking credit on Dark Star.
Yes, I think the scenario might have been more what we conjectured, that he was cutting him off and cutting him out, and that would cause him to murder Bob Crane. At least that's a motive. If that's the motive, then yes, I think John Carpenter, director of Body Bags, murdered Bob Crane. Otherwise, as I know you called it the alien sort of theory.
I mean, when it comes to true crime, Unsolved, it kind of is.
But not to be a downer, and I'm not shaming anyone in their choice of lifestyle, but, Bob Crane seemed to not only be part of the scene, but was also a ladies' man and would pick up any girl he could. It's really not without the realm of possibility that he took someone's girlfriend and or wife home, and kabam, that's what happened to him on that fateful evening.
I mean, again, I'm not saying that because I don't think it couldn't have happened. I'm just saying that because it's not the fun answer.
No.
Look, I think I would be inclined to agree that I think the person who killed Bob Crane knew Bob Crane, because Bob Crane's house was not broken into. The person who killed him just came in. So they knew how to get in, or they knew enough to get in without causing a ruckus. So that could have been a couple of people. John Carpenter, again, look, hangers on or hangers on. There are plenty of people like that. Peter Ivers may have been murdered by someone who was in a similar situation. Your golden goose is your meal ticket is out the door and you don't have a way to get on that gravy train as it leaves the station. And so what are my options? Do whatever I can to try to stop that from happening, to the point of maybe killing them by accident or on purpose, or just live with it. 99 times out of 100, you're just going to live with it. But it's the one time out of 100 where it's something like this. And that's what the movie's kind of getting at. And again, is that what could have happened in reality? I don't know. But I think that that's a line of thinking that they clearly investigated, people who had much more time on their hands to talk about this in much more in-depth ways, to the point of prosecution. They didn't come back with a guilty verdict. They acquitted him. But would they acquit him now if we had the DNA technology we do now then? I don't know, any more than anybody else does. That's conjecture. But the movie tells a good story, a story that tracks, but it's not the story that the person who got murdered deserves to be told about them. And now there will not be another story told about them. That's the way it goes with stuff like this. Like, what's the point? Like, they have the one movie. He's not a big enough deal now for people that are making these kinds of things for anybody to address it. I wish they would, because it's an interesting story, but
maybe we can get a 4-part Netflix documentary with plenty of drone shots.
I mean, that's what this would be, right?
Yeah, I'd like to see it, actually.
I mean, I'm with you. Like, the thing I would like is a factual right
take on it. Yeah, because the movie is a lot of conjecture. The movie it does take a stand, and it should. It's a piece of art. It needs to
entertain,
needs to lay its chips on the table, but also like to deliver. Like you said about Zodiac, like you can't 3 hours later go, and guess what, everybody? We still don't know. Have a good night. Like,
I mean, you can,
and it's always unsatisfying.
Right. But I mean, again, like, I get that art needs to satisfy the unsatisfiable things of reality. And that can be one of the purposes of art, is to create something we can't experience, or itch a scratch that can't be itched in reality. And I get why Zodiac did it, but like, don't base your stuff off of bad facts and conjecture.
Let me ask you a Zodiac question, because I know you're knowledgeable.
Sure.
Okay. The kid who was shot in that initial, lover's leap.
Michael Maginot.
Yeah, him. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he was shot. He did survive.
Right. Grew up to go to Westworld, I think.
Yeah, exactly. He's great in it, by the way.
Yeah.
That the actual guy, did he eventually identify the person that the movie identifies as the killer?
That is the Michael Maginot scene from the movie actually happened.
That actually happened.
Yes.
Okay. So the movie makes a stand by presenting us that as the last scene in the movie that occurs, but it did occur.
It did occur, yes.
Okay, right on.
Right. Like, again, like, it's taking a stand, but
because we have no idea if the breakup between Bob Crane and John Carpenter, director of the TV miniseries Elvis, went down the way it went down. You know, like
right.
that's all conjecture. You know, it's all sort of an invention of the screenwriters or or Graysmith.
Right. Which again, like I said, we know that Robert Graysmith sometimes, even with things that are meant to be nonfiction, seasons his meat a little too much because sometimes the truth is a little bland.
Oh no.
I mean, look, I get it. Like it's you're trying to sell a book. Like, I mean, read a 500-page book about an unsolved crime and then there's no conclusion at the end. What the fuck? How the fuck do you feel then? That doesn't just take 3 hours to read for some people. Like, it's just the same thing. But the reality is the Zodiac murder, just like this one, is unsolved. Just like this.
It was John Carroll Lynch. I saw it in that movie.
I mean, look, when the movie has him go, if I was the Zodiac killer, I wouldn't tell you. And then he changes his voice back. It's like, movie, come on. Like, you're laying it on a little thick, guys.
This is honestly, once we stop recording, I'm going to watch Zodiac again.
Same.
I fucking love that movie.
Same.
Right?
That's my favorite David Fincher movie.
I think it might be mine now too, honestly. Like, it's so masterful. It's just a wonderful piece of film.
I will feel good in like a couple years when the tide has completely turned on that movie and I can go, I liked it from the day it fucking came out.
Yeah.
I saw that shit in theaters with my mom because she lived through that as a kid. She was alive. And that movie she cannot hear Hurdy-Gurdy Man anymore. Wow. She didn't like it to begin with, but she really doesn't like it now. And that is the sign of someone like David Fincher.
Yeah, it's so perfectly placed. Like, we should probably talk that movie sometime because I'll start going right. I won't stop for a long, long time.
Until the next time you and I do an episode of these, which is too infrequent because these are way too much fun to talk about things that aren't necessarily just movies. Where can people find you?
Find me at Weirding Way Media, weirdingwaymedia.com. I have it's like a dozen shows. It's absurd, but I'll mention the most current, I guess. I do a show called Astounding Tales of the Public Domain. It's enhanced performances of public domain stories from the golden age of science fiction with writers like Ray Bradbury and H.P. Lovecraft and all the great ones. And I also do a new show. It's a music podcast called Noise Junkies, which I do with Mondo Heather's Heather Drain and HP, the resident musical genius of Weirding Way Media. He scores half a dozen shows. He just scores everything I do. And he has his own podcast about taxi called Night Mr. Walters, a taxi podcast. So in a nutshell, Weirding Way Media, Chris, that's the answer.
And it's still my answer too. weirdingwaymedia.com. That's where you're finding this show and where you can find so many other shows like 80s TV Ladies, which one of those hosts is may or may not be cohabiting with the one and only Mr. Richard Haddam, who's been on here plenty of times. The Mothman, folks. Right? Also, you can find Twisted and Uncorked, two ladies who are funnier than me. Because you know what? They are, and it's the truth. And you should go listen to them.
That's a really funny show. I've actually been listening to it a lot. They're really funny.
They are.
They're currently they're having like a dry month, and it's for a good cause and everything. But like, get drinking, ladies.
I'm with you. I mean, hey, you can run a car on electric, but sometimes you got to put gas back in the tank. Got to fire it up. Got to go 110. Those electric vehicles can't hit that high of speed. And you know what? I'll mention the projection booth because that's the show that started it all, folks, in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, that'll be the show that ends.
As it should be.
Right. The alpha and the omega. As for this show, scarystorieswetell.com, Scary Stories WT on social media. But that shit sucks. So if you want to follow, great. If not, just like, rate, and review the show wherever you find it, which is more than likely iTunes. Maggie the Odd and Dustin Rutledge do the album artwork for the show. You can find Maggie over at dolanmuseum.com. And my good friend, Alex Malinek of Blondo, makes the music for the show. You can find him on Spotify. Just search Blondo. Father Malone, thank you so much for joining me. It's always been a gas. and a blast.
All right, yeah, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're going to focus. Auto focus. Boy, Bob Crane deserved better, folks, than two ding-dongs riffing on him in 2023. But you know what? God bless, as they would say.
You know, I was a projectionist at a movie theater that was showing this movie.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I watched it a lot. The end.